Hello everyone. Hello everyone and welcome back to another little reading session. Gonna light our candle. It says F for Faye, that's me. Light it, don't play with lighters at home, kids. Candle. We're going to enjoy a nice little relaxing evening reading session. Gonna grab your drink of any choice in any mug. I've got mine in my Hufflepuff mug today. Have tea, have coffee, any nice relaxing beverage of your choice. And today I'm going to be reading the rest of chapter 3 where we left off and see how far we get. We still have a good 5 pages left to go of chapter 3 and we shall see. If you missed any of the previous chapters, they are on my YouTube channel, Let's Read Stories, and you can find chapter 1 through to where we are up to now in chapter 3, and yeah, we are going to start the reading. Just a little recap though on what has previously happened in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. We have just found that there is mysterious letters turning up to the Dursleys' residence, and now Vernon Dudley has decided he would like everyone to pack their things and they're moving. Let's go. I've got my wand. Let's go. He looked so dangerous with his half moustache missing that no one dared argue. 10 minutes later they had wrenched their way through the boarded up doors and they were in the car, speeding towards the motorway. Dudley was sniffling in the car, in the back seat. His father had hit him around the head for holding them up while trying to pack his television, video and computer in his sports bag. They drove, and they drove. Even Aunt Petunia didn't dare ask where they were going. Every now and then Uncle Vernon would take a sharp turn and drive in the opposite direction for a while. Shake him off, he would mutter whenever he did this. They didn't stop to eat or drink all day. By nightfall, Dudley was howling. He'd never had such a bad day in his life. He was hungry, he missed 5 television programs he wanted to see, and he'd never gone so long without blowing up an alien on his computer. Uncle Vernon stopped at last outside a gloomy-looking hotel on the outskirts of a big city. Dudley and Harry shared a room with twin beds, damp and musty sheets. Dudley snored, but Harry stayed awake, sitting on the windowsill, staring down at lights of the passing cars and wondering. They ate stale cornflakes and cold tinned tomatoes on toast for breakfast the next day. They had just finished when the owner of the hotel came over to the table. "Excuse me, but is one of you Mr. H. Potter? Only I got about 100 of these letters at the front desk." She held up a letter so that they could read the green ink address. "Mr. H. Potter, room 17, Railview Hotel, Coaksworth." Harry made a grab for the letter, but Uncle Vernon knocked his hand out the way. The women stared. "I'll take 'em," said Uncle Vernon, standing up quickly and following her from the dining room. "Wouldn't it be better just to go home, dear?" Aunt Petunia suggested timidly. Hours later, but Uncle Vernon didn't seem to hear her. Exactly what he was looking for, none of them knew. He drove them into the middle of the forest, got out, looked around, shook his head, got back into the car, and off they went again. The same thing happened in the middle of the plough field, halfway across the suspension bridge at the top of the multi-storey car park. And that is the page that we have just read. On to the next one. Daddy's gone mad, hasn't he? Dudley asked Aunt Petunia dully late that afternoon. Uncle Vernon had parked at the coast, locked them all inside the car and disappeared. It started to rain. Great drops beat on the roof of the car. Dudley snivelled. It's Monday, he told his mother. The great humbuto's on tonight. I want to stay somewhere with a television. Monday. This reminded Harry of something. If it was Monday, and you could usually count on Dudley to know the days of the week because of television, then tomorrow, Tuesday, was Harry's 11th birthday. Of course his birthday was never exactly fun. Last year the Dursleys had given him a coat hanger and a pair of Uncle Vernon's old socks. Still, you weren't 11 every day. Uncle Vernon was back and he was smiling. He was also carrying a long, thin package and didn't answer Aunt Petunia when she asked what he had brought. Found the perfect place, he said. Come on, everyone out. It was very cold outside the car. Uncle Vernon was pointing at what looked like a large rock way out to sea. Perched on top of the rock was a most miserable little shack you could imagine. One thing was certain. There was no televisions in there. Storm forecast for tonight, said Uncle Vernon gleefully, clapping his hands together. And this gentleman's kindly agreed to lend us his boat. The toothless old man came ambling up to them, pointing with a rather wicked grin at an old rowing boat bobbing in the iron-grey water below them. I've already got us some rations, said Uncle Vernon. So, all aboard. It was freezing in the boat. Icy sea spray and rain crept down their necks, and a chilly wind whipped their faces. After what seemed like hours, they reached the rock, where Uncle Vernon, slipping and sliding, led the way to the broken-down house. The inside was horrible. It smelled strongly of seaweed. The wind whistled through the gaps in the wooden walls, and the fireplace was damp and empty. There was only 2 rooms. Uncle Vernon's rations turned out to be a packet of crisps each and 4 bananas. He tried to start a fire, but the empty crisp packets just smoked and shriveled up. Could do with some of those letters now, eh? He said cheerfully. He was in a very good mood. Obviously, he had thought nobody stood a chance to reaching them here in the storm to deliver post. Harry privately agreed, though the thought didn't cheer him up at all. And this is the page that we have just read. On to the next page. As nightfall, the promised storm blew up around them. Spray from the high waves splattered the walls of the hut and the fire. Fierce wind rattled the filthy windows. Aunt Petunia found a few mouldy blankets in the second room and made up a bed for Dudley on the moth-eaten sofa. She and Uncle Vernon went off to the lumpy bed next door, and Harry was left to find the softest bit of floor he could and curled up under the thinnest, most ragged blanket. The storm raged more and more ferociously as the night went on. Harry couldn't sleep. He shivered and turned over, trying to get comfortable, his stomach rumbling with hunger. Dudley's snores were drowned by the low rolls of thunder that started near midnight. The light dial of Dudley's watch was dangling over the edge of the sofa on his fat wrist, told Harry he'd be 11 in 10 minutes' time. He lay and watched his birthday tick near, wondering if the Dursleys would remember at all, wondering where the letter writer was now. 5 minutes to go, Harry heard something creak outside. He hoped the roof wasn't going to fall in, although he might be warmer if it did. Maybe the house at Privet Drive would be so full of letters when they got back that he'd be able to steal one somehow. 3 minutes to go. Was the sea slapping on a hard rock like that? And 2 minutes to go. What was that funny crunching noise? Was the rock crumbling into the sea? 1 minute to go and he'd be 11. 30 seconds. 20. 10. 9. Maybe he'd wake Dudley up just to annoy him. 3. 2. 1. Boom! The whole shack shivered and Harry sat bolt upright, staring at the door. Someone was outside, knocking to come in. And then that's the last page of that chapter. The next one is The Keeper of Keys, chapter 4. Boom. They knocked again. Dudley jerked awake. "Where's the cannon?" he said stupidly. There was a crash behind them and Uncle Vernon came skidding into the room. He was holding a rifle in his hands. Now they knew what had been in the long, thin package he had brought with them. "Who's there?" he shouted. "I warn you, I'm armed." There was a pause, then smash! The door was hit with such a force that it swung clean off of its hinges, and with a deafening crash landed flat on the floor. A giant of a man was standing in the doorway. His face was almost completely hidden by a long, shaggy mane of hair and wild, tangled beard, but you can make out his eyes, glinting like black beetles under the hair. The giant squeezed his way into the hut, stopping so that his head just brushing the ceiling. He bent down, picked up the door and fitted it easily back into its frame. The noise of the storm outside dropped a little. He turned to look up at them. "Couldn't make a cup of tea, could ya? It's not been easy a journey." He strode over the sofa where Dudley was sat frozen with fear. "Budge up, you great lump," said the stranger. Dudley squeaked and ran to hide behind his mother, who was crouching terrified behind Uncle Vernon. "And here's Harry," said the giant. Harry looked up into the fierce, wild, shadowy face and looked at the beetled eyes with crinkly in a smile. "Last time I saw you were only a baby," said the giant. "You look a lot like your dad, but you got your mum's eyes." Uncle Vernon made a funny, rasping noise. "I demand that you leave at once, sir," he said. "You are breaking and entering." "Ah, shut up, Dursley, you great prune," said the giant. He reached over the back of the sofa, jerked the gun out of Uncle Vernon's hand, bent it into a knot and as easily as if it had been made of rubber, and threw it into the corner of the room. Uncle Vernon made another funny noise, like a mouse being trodden on. "Anyway, Harry," said the giant, turning his back on the Dursleys, "a very happy birthday to you. Got something for you here. I might have sat on it at some point, but it'll taste alright." From an inside pocket of his black coat, he pulled a slight squash box. Harry opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was large, sticky chocolate cake with "Happy Birthday, Harry" written on it in green icing. Harry looked up at the giant. He meant to say thank you, but words got lost on the way out of his mouth, and what he said instead was, "Who are you?" The giant chuckled. "True, I haven't introduced myself. Rubeus Hagrid, keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts." He held out an enormous hand and shook Harry's whole arm. "What about the tea then, eh?" he said, rubbing his hands together. "I'd no say nor to summit stronger if you got it, if you don't mind." His eyes fell on the empty grate which had shriveled crisp packets in and he snorted. He bent over the fireplace. They couldn't see what he was doing, but then he drew back a second later. There was a roaring fire there. It filled the whole damp hut with flickering lights, and Harry felt the warmth wash over him as though he had sunk into a hot bath. The giant sat back down on the sofa, which sagged under his weight, and began taking all sorts of things out of his pocket of his coat. A copper kettle, a squishy packet of sausages, a poker, a teapot, several chipped mugs, and a bottle of some amber liquid, which he took a swig from before starting making the tea. Soon the hut was full of the sound and smell of sizzling sausages. Nobody said a thing while the giant was working, but as he slid the first 6 fat, juicy, slightly burnt sausages from the poker, Dudley fidgeted a little bit. Uncle Vernon said sharply, "Don't touch anything he gives you, Dudley." The giant chuckled darkly. "Your great pudding of a son don't need fattening any more. Dursleys, don't worry." He passed the sausages to Harry, who was so hungry he had never tasted anything so wonderful, but he still couldn't take his eyes off the giant. Finally, as nobody seemed to explain anything, he said, "I'm sorry, but I still don't really know who you are." The giant took a gulp of the tea and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Call me Hagrid," he said. "Everyone does. And like I told you, I'm keeper of keys at Hogwarts. You know all about Hogwarts, of course." No," said Harry. Hagrid looked shocked. "Sorry," said Harry quickly. "Sorry," barked Hagrid, turning to stare at the Dursleys, who shrank back in the shadows. "It's them that should be sorry. I knew you weren't getting your letters, but I'd never thought you wouldn't know about Hogwarts. For crying out loud. Did you never wonder where your parents learned it all?" "Or what?" asked Harry. "Or what?" Hagrid thundered. "Now wait just a second." He had leapt to his feet. In his anger he seemed to fill the whole hut. The Dursleys were cowering against the wall. "Did you mean to tell me," he growled at the Dursleys, "that this boy knows nothing about anything?" Harry thought this was going a bit far. He had been to school after all, and his marks weren't bad. "I know some things," he said. "I can, do maths and stuff." But Hagrid simply waved his hand and said, "About our world. I mean your world, my world, your parents' world." "What world?" Hagrid looked as if he had completely exploded. "Dursleys," he boomed. Uncle Vernon, who had gone very pale, whispered something that sounded like Mimblewimble. Hagrid stared wildly at Harry. "But you must know about your mum and dad," he said. "I mean, they're famous. You're famous." Oh. "What? My mum and dad weren't famous, were they? You don't know. You don't know. Hagrid ran his fingers through his hair, fixing Harry with a bewildered stare. You don't know who you are, he said finally. Uncle Vernon suddenly found his voice. Stop, he commanded. Stop right there, sir. I forbid you to tell the boy anything. A braver man than Vernon Dudley would have quilled under the furious look Hagrid now gave him. When Hagrid spoke, his every syllable trembled with rage. You never told him what was the letters Dumbledore left for him. I was there. I saw Dumbledore leave it, Dursley. And you've kept it from him all these years. Kept what from me? Said Harry eagerly. Stop, I forbid you, yelled Uncle Vernon in a panic. Aunt Petunia gave a gasp of horror. Go boil your heads, both of you, said Hagrid. Harry, you're a wizard. There was a silence inside the hut. Only the sea and the whistling wind could be heard. Finally, this is this page that we have just read. On to the next, which seems to have a little something in it. This little something seems to be a little letter. Oh no, I want to open this, but how? Aha! You got there. And this right here is the letter, if you can see, that Harry receives. And you've got this side as well. And I shall read it out. Of course I will. It says, Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have a place at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Please find the enclosed list of all the necessary books and equipment. Term begins on 1st of September. We await your owl by no later than the 31st of July. Yours sincerely, Minerva McGonagall. Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress. Uniform. First year students will require 3 sets of plain work robes, black, 1 plain pointed hat, black, for day wear, 1 pair of protective gloves, dragon hide or similar, 1 winter cloak, black silver fastening. Please note that all pupils' clothes should carry name tags. Set books. All students should have a copy of each of the following. The Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1, by Miranda Goshawk. A History of Magic, by Berthalda Bogshot. Magical Theory, by Albert Waffling. A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration, by Emmerich Switch. 1000 Magical Herbs and Fungi, by Phileas Spore. Magical Draughts and Potions, by Arsenigus Jigger. I'm not quite sure if I said that name right. Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, by Newt Scamander. The Dark Forces, A Guide to Self-Protection, by Quentin Trimble. Other equipment. 1 wand, 1 cauldron, pewter standard size 2, 1 set glass or crystal vials, 1 telescope, a set brass scales, Students may also bring owl or a cat or a toad. Parents are reminded that first years are not allowed their own broomsticks. And that's the letter that Harry has received. Should make sure that is nice and tightly safe. And on to the next page. I'm a what? Gasped Harry. A wizard, of course, said Hagrid, sitting back on the sofa, which groaned and sank even lower. And a thumping good 'un, I'd say, once you've been trained up a bit. With a mum and a dad like yours, who wouldn't be, eh? And I reckon it's about time that you read your letter. Harry stretched out his hand at the last to take the yellowish envelope addressed to the emerald green to Mr. Harry Potter, the floor, hut on the rock, the sea. He pulled out the letter and read, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Headmaster Albus Dumbledore, Order of Merlin, First Class, Grand Source, Chief Warlock, Supreme Mudwump, International Confederate of Wizards. And we have just read, we have just read the letter that's there. Clearer for you to see. Questions exploded inside. Harry's head like fireworks, and he couldn't decide which to ask first. After a few minutes he stammered, What does it mean, they await my owl? Galloping Gordons, that reminds me, said Hagrid, clapping his hands to his forehead with enough force to knock over the cart horse, and from yet another pocket inside the overcoat he pulled out an owl. A real, live, rather ruffled-looking owl. A long quill and a roll of parchment. With his tongue between his teeth, he scribbled a note which Harry could read upside down. Dear Mr. Dumbledore, given Harry his letter, taking him to buy his things tomorrow. Weather's horrible, hope you're well, Hagrid. Hagrid rolled up the note, gave it to the owl, which clamped it in its beak. Went to the door and threw the owl out into the storm. Then he came back and sat down as though it was normal as talking on the telephone. Harry realised his mouth was wide open and closed it quickly. Where was I? Said Hagrid. But at that moment Uncle Vernon, still ash-faced but looking very angry, moved into the firelight. He's not going, he said. Hagrid grunted. I'd like to see a great muggle like you stop him, he said. A what? Said Harry, interested. Yes. And then that's the rest of this page that we have just read. On to the next. A muggle, said Hagrid. It's what we call non-magic folk like them, and it's your bad luck you grew up in a family of them, of the biggest muggles I have ever laid eyes on. We swore when we took him in we'd put a stop to that rubbish, said Uncle Vernon. Swore we'd stamp it out of him. Wizard indeed. You knew, said Harry. You knew I'm a wizard? Knew, shrieked Aunt Petunia suddenly. Knew, of course we knew. How could you not be? My dratted sister, being what she was. Oh, she got the letter like that and disappeared off to that school and came home every holiday with her pockets full of frog spawn, turning teacups into rats. I was the only one who saw her for what she was, a freak. But for my mother and father, oh no, it was Lily this and Lily that, They were proud of having a witch in the family. She stopped to draw a deep breath and then was ranting on. It seemed she had been waiting to say this all these years. Then she met the Potter at school and they left and got married and had you. And of course I knew you would be just the same, just as strange, just as abnormal. And then, if you please, she went and got herself blown up. And we got landed with you. Harry had gone very white. As soon as he found his voice, he said, "Blown up? You told me they died in a car crash." "Car crash?" roared Hagrid, jumping up so angrily that the Dursleys scuttered back to the corner. How could a car crash kill James and Lily Potter? It's an outrage, a scandal. Harry Potter not knowing his own story when every kid in the world knows his name. But why? What happened? Harry asked urgently. The anger faded from Hagrid's face. He looked something anxious. I'd never expected this, he said in a low, worried voice. I had no idea when Dumbledore told me there might be a trouble getting hold of you, how much you didn't know. Harry, I didn't know if I am the right person to tell you. But someone's gotta. You can't go off to Hogwarts not knowing. He threw a dirty look at the Dursleys. Well, it's best you know as much as I can tell you. Mind, I can't tell you everything. It's a great mystery, parts of it. He sat down and stared into the fire for a few seconds and then said, It begins, I suppose, with a person called... But it's incredible you don't know his name. Everyone in our world knows. Who? Well, I don't like saying it. The name, if it can help it, no one does. Why not? Gropping gargoyles. Harry, people are still scared. Blimey, this is difficult. See, there was this wizard who went bad. As bad as you can go. Worse. Worse than worse. His name was... Hagrid gulped, but no words came out. Could you write it down? Harry suggested. Nah, can't spell it. All right. Voldemort. Hagrid shuddered. Don't make me say it again. Anyway, this wizard about 20 years ago started looking for followers. Got 'em too. Some were afraid, some just wanted a bit of his power. 'Cause he was getting himself power, all right. Dark days, Harry. Didn't know who to trust, didn't dare get friendly with strange wizards or witches. Terrible things happened. He was taken over. Of course some stood up to him, and he killed him. Horribly. The only safe place left was Hogwarts. Reckon Dumbledore's the only one you know who was afraid of. Didn't dare try taking the school. Not just then, anyway. Now your mum and dad were all good a witch and wizard as I ever knew. Head boy and girl in their day. Suppose the mystery is why you know who never tried to get 'em on the side before. Probably they knew they were too close to Dumbledore to want anything to do with the dark side. Maybe he thought he could persuade him. Maybe he just wanted him out the way. All anyone knows is he turned up in the village where you was all living in Halloween 10 years ago. You were just a year old. He came to your house and Hagrid suddenly pulled out a very dirty spotted handkerchief and blew his nose with the sound of a foghorn. Sorry, he said, but it's that sad. Knew your mum and dad are nice people you couldn't find anywhere. You know who killed him. And this is the real mystery of the thing. He tried to kill you too. Wanted to make a clean job of it, I suppose. Or maybe he just liked killing by then. But he couldn't do it. Never wondered how you got that mark on your forehead. That was no ordinary cut. That's what you get when a powerful evil curse touches you. Took care of your mum and dad's old house. But it didn't work on you. And that's why you're famous, Harry. No one ever lived after he decided to kill him. No one except you. And he killed some of the best witches and wizards of their age. The McKinnons, the Bones, the Pretwits. And you was only a baby, and you lived. Something very painful was going on in Harry's mind as Hagrid's story came to a close. He saw again the blinding flash of green light, more clearly than he had ever remembered it before. And then he remembered something else, for the first time in his life. A high, cold, cruel laughter. Hagrid was watching him sadly. Took you from the ruined house myself, when Dumbledore's order brought you to this lot. Lot of old tush, said Uncle Vernon. Harry jumped up and almost forgotten that Dursleys were there. Uncle Vernon certainly seemed to have gotten back his courage. He was glaring at Hagrid and his fists were clenched. Now you listen here, boy, he snarled. I accept that there's something strange about you. Probably nothing a good beating would have cured. And as for all of this, your parents, well, they were weirdos, no denying it. And the world's better off without them, in my opinion. Asked for all they got. Getting mixed up with these wizards type. Just what I expected. Always knew they'd come to a sticky end. But at that moment, Hagrid left from the sofa and drew a battered pink umbrella from inside his coat, pointing this at Uncle Vernon like a sword. He said, I am warning you, Dursley. I am warning you. One more word, in danger of being spread on the end of the umbrella by a bearded giant. Uncle Vernon's courage failed again. He flattened himself against the wall and fell silent. That's better, said Hagrid, breathing heavily and sitting back down on the sofa with this time sagged right to the floor. Harry, meanwhile, still had questions to ask. Hundreds of them. What happened to Sorry, I mean, you know who. Good question, Harry. Disappeared. Vanished. Same night he tried to kill you. Make you even more famous. That's the biggest mystery, see? He was getting more and more powerful. Where'd he go? Some say he died. Cold swallowed, in my opinion. Don't know if he had enough human left in him to die. Some say he's still out there, bidding his time. But I don't believe it. People who who was on his side come back to ours. Some of them came out a kind of trance. Didn't recognise that they could have done it if he was coming back. That's this page. Most of us reckon he's still out there somewhere, but lost his powers. Too weak to carry on. 'Cause something about you finished him, Harry. There was something going on that night he hadn't counted on. I don't know what it was. No one does. But something about you stumped him, all right. Hagrid looked at Harry with warmth and respect blazing in his eyes. But Harry instead of feeling pleased and proud, felt quite sure that there had been a horrible mistake. A wizard? Him? How could it possibly be? He spent his life being clouted by Dudley and bullied by Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon. If he was really a wizard, why hadn't he been able to turn into warty toads every time that they tried to lock him in his cupboard? If he'd once defeated the greatest sorcerer in the world, how come Dudley had always been able to kick him around like a football? Hagrid, he said quietly, I think you must have made a mistake. I don't think I can be a wizard. To his surprise, Hagrid chuckled. Not a wizard, eh? Never made up things happen when you're scared or angry. Harry looked into the fire. Now he comes to think of it, every odd thing that had ever happened to his aunt and uncle, furious with him, had happened when Harry, had been upset or angry. Chased by Dudley's gang, he had somehow found himself out of their reach. Dreading to go to school with a ridiculous haircut, he'd managed to make it grow back. And the very last time Dudley had hit him, he had got his revenge, without even realising what he was doing. Hadn't he set the boa constrictor on him? Harry looked back at Hagrid, smiling, and saw that Hagrid was positively beaming at him. See, said Hagrid, Harry Potter not a wizard. You wait, you'll be right famous at Hogwarts. But Uncle Vernon wasn't going to give up without a fight. Haven't I told you he's not going? He hissed. He's going to Stonewall High, and he'll be grateful for it. I've read those letters, and he needs all sort of rubbish, spell books and wands, and if he wants to go, a great muggle like you won't stop him, growled Hagrid. Stop, Lily and James Potter's son going to Hogwarts? You're mad. His name's been down ever since he was born. He's off the finest school of witchcraft and wizardry in the world. 7 years there, and he won't know himself. He'll be with youngsters of his own sort, for a change, and he'll be under the greatest headmaster Hogwarts had ever had, Albus Dumbledore. I am not paying for some crackpot old fool to teach him magic tricks, yelled Uncle Vernon. But he had finally gone too far. Hagrid seized his umbrella and whirled it over his head. Never, he thundered, insult Albus Dumbledore in front of me. He brought the umbrella swishing down through the air to point at Dudley. There was a flash of violet light and sound like a firecracker, a sharp squeal, and next second Dudley was dancing on the spot with his hands clasped over his fat bottom, howling in pain. When he turned his back on them, Harry saw a curly pig's tail poking through the hole of his trousers. And that's this page, all lovely and illustrated. Uncle Vernon roared, pulling Aunt Petunia and Dudley into the other room. He cast one last terrified look at Harry and slammed the door behind them. Hagrid looked down at his umbrella and stroked his beard. Shouldn't have lost my temper, he said ruefully. But it didn't work anyway. Meant to turn him into a pig, but I suppose he was so much of a pig anyway, there wasn't much left for me to do. He cast a sideways look at Harry under his bushy eyebrows. Be grateful it didn't mention that to anyone at Hogwarts, he said. I'm not supposed to do magic, strictly speaking. I was allowed to do it for a bit, and get your letters to you and stuff. One of the reason I was so keen to take the job. Why aren't you supposed to do magic? Asked Harry. Oh well, I was at Hogwarts myself, but I got expelled. To tell you the truth, in my 3rd year, they snapped my wand in half and everything, but Dumbledore let me stay as a gamekeeper. Great man, Dumbledore. Why were you expelled? It's getting late and we've got lots to do tomorrow, said Hagrid, loudly. Gotta get up to town and get your books and that. He took off his thick black coat and threw it to Harry. You can keep under that, he said. Don't mind if it wrinkles a bit. I think I still got a couple of the miss in one of those pockets. And that's the end of chapter 4. And that's what that one looks like. And we are going to leave chapter 5 for another day. Tomorrow, most probably. And this is what chapter 5 will be in store for everyone. And I would like to say thank you for everyone who has watched the stream tonight and hopefully has sent people off to sleep. And I hope to see you all tomorrow and to listen to some more stories. So I will bid you all a good night or good morning, depending where you are. And yeah, see you next time.